Well, hey guys! Good lord. Long time no see, guys! I know. It's a lot of spam. I don't like spam. Oh my gosh, Tara. That's fantastic. I like the little guy with sunglasses. I just want food in my bed. Yes. There you go. That should be your raid command. Yep. Pretty great. Alrighty. Well, thanks for popping in, anyways. Even if you can't stay, I appreciate it. Um, so... Oh, it's right here. Thought my book was over on the shelf over there, but it's not. So, I've decided 3 push-ups for every follow raid. Wait, does that mean I have to do push-ups? Or does that mean Tori has to do push-ups? I don't think I even have any followers, so there's that. Just watching you talk right now. I keep dripping water on my desk, and I'm not okay with that. I was trying to explain to my mom just now, like, what a book stream is, and, like, the purpose of it, and she doesn't quite get it. She thinks it's kind of weird. Must be thirsty. Wait, we don't count? I don't know what you're talking about, Reddy. I don't know if you guys are following me. I don't have fun little notifications when people follow me. Because I have a Mac and it doesn't like me. That guy doesn't count. He can't even read. Oh, yeah. Well, she doesn't understand book streams. Like, she doesn't get how... Like, she's like, well, why would people listen to you just read No, she said, so you just read a book aloud to no one. And I'm like, no, people are watching me. And she's like, well, how do you know people are watching you? And I was like, because it says so in my chat. So, she's like, well, how many people are watching you? And then I just got sad, because I was like, well, Tori watches me, so... But then now you guys are here, so now I feel like I'm not reading to no one, so thank you. I have 21 followers. You know, Tori... You don't have to be so snarky, okay? No, you don't have to be more Stevie. Yes, you're my hype man. Main man. You're my main man. My main man. Like in Wreck-It Ralph. Ralph! Alright, so. Still reading... Oh, look, it's on the other side. That side. Right there. Tell you what book we're reading. I fixed that. I figured that out, so I feel really smart. Ooh. My little square turned from green to yellow to red, so I hope you can still see me. So we're in chapter 9. And Tara, I think you missed my first stream and then it disappeared forever because I was dumb. But I am going to reread the first 5 chapters, which is what I read my very first stream. So I'm going to reread. Thank you, Tara. My pointing skills are fantastic. And Riddy. You're supposed to be hyping me, not slaughtering me. So I am going to reread the first 5 chapters and I'll probably stream it just so that the chat will be there. Oh wait, hold on, this is bothering me. There we go. And then I'll probably stream it anyways just so the chat and the formatting will be the same rather than just record it. So there will probably be a stream coming up called like a catch-up stream, where I'm going to reread what was lost forever. Just so, and I'm planning on posting these to my YouTube channel, just so if you, like, want to watch them you know, in the future, or if you miss one or can't be here, that you have some kind of way to still find out what's going on in the book. Because these books are kind of, like, they've reprinted them, and I think maybe paperback, but they're not super common. Like, you can't just go into Barnes & Noble and find them. So, you know, I'd hate for people to... my channel is actually my full name, which is Holland Palmgren. So it's my last name too. But if you type in Holland, P-A-L-M, it will probably come up. So I could just put, you know what, I might do that. If I can figure out how to do it. Let's see. You all are being sassy, you know. I'm just this tiny little baby streamer that doesn't know anything. Let me see. Hold on. Bear with me, please. I'm going to try something new, you seasoned Twitchers. I think that's my YouTube. One sec. Dun, 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 dun. Rid of your song is stuck in my head. Oh, wait. Here we go. My channel. Sorry, guys. I know this is really riveting. Trying to do this. I'm doing this just for you, Tara, because you missed my first stream. Let's see if this works. I'm really sorry, guys. I should have planned ahead, but I didn't even think about this until just now. Okay, there we go. See if you can see this. Oh look, you already subbed. I think I have like 3 subscribers, so. There you go. Now everybody can find me. My lovely YouTube videos. It is all natural sass. No, it's okay. Now anybody can find me on YouTube and Twitter and everything. That's my username for everything, so there you go. But you can't catch up on YouTube yet because I haven't uploaded it, so this is actually a lie. But we'll see. So, now that I'm all fancy. Chapter 9. Or Chapter the 9th. Sorry guys, you ready? I'm ready. You ready? Okay. So, recap. Enola heard she's going to the train station to buy a ticket to head to London, but instead there was all the constables showed up, and she heard a newspaper boy saying that the Duke's son has gone missing. So, instead of buying a ticket, I bought a newspaper instead. That was the end of the last chapter. So, chapter the 9th. At a tea shop beside Belvedere Station, I sat at a corner table, facing the wall, in order to lift my veil. Remember, she's dressed as a widow, in disguise. I needed to do this for 2 purposes. To breakfast upon tea and scones, and to look at young Viscount, that's actually Viscount, Viscount Tewkesbury Basilweather's photographic likeness. Which I know that from Downton Abbey. Side note. Occupying nearly half the front page of the newspaper, a formal studio portrait showed the boy dressed in, heavens have mercy, I hoped he wasn't made to wear velvet and frills every day, But how else might he go about with his fair hair rendered artistic by the curling tongs hanging to his shoulders? All too apparently, his mother had fallen in love with Little Lord Fauntleroy, wretched book responsible for the agonies of a generation of the pages stuck together. Well-born boys. Got up in the height of Fauntleroy's fashion, the little Lord Tewkesbury wore a patent leather buckle slippers, white stockings, black velvet knee pants with satin bows at the sides, and a satin sash under his black velvet jacket with its flowing white lace cuffs and collar. He stared at the camera with no expression whatsoever on his face, but I thought I saw a trace of hardness around his jaw. Duke's heir of tender years horrifically missing, screamed the headline. Reaching for a second scone, I read, a scene of the most alarming implications unfolded early Wednesday morning at Basilweather Hall, ancestral home of the Dukes of Basilweather, near the thriving town of Belvedere, when an under gardener noticed that one of the French doors of the billiards room had been broken into. The household staff, then being alerted, next discovered that the lock of the room's interior door had been forced, the woodwork showing the marks of a vicious knife. Naturally fearful of burglary, the butler checked the silverware pantry and discovered nothing missing. Nor were the plate and candelabra of the dining room disturbed, or the innumerable valuable contents of the drawing room, the gallery, the library, or anywhere else in Basilweather's Hall's extensive premises. Indeed, no further doors had been forced downstairs. It was not until the upstairs maids commenced carrying the customary ewers of hot water to the ducal family's quarters for their matutinal. I don't even know how to pronounce that, I'm sorry. Ablutions that Viscount Tewkesbury, Marquess of Basilweather's chamber door was found standing ajar. His furnishings strewn about the room bore mute witness to a desperate struggle, and of his noble personage there was no sign. The Viscount, Lord Basilweather's heir, and indeed his only son, a mere 12 years of age. 12? I exclaimed, incredulous. What is that, madam? Asked the hostess behind me. Ah, nothing. Hastily I lowered the newspaper to the table and my veil to cover my face. I thought he was younger. Much younger. In his curled tresses and storybook suit. 12. Why, the boy should be wearing a sturdy woolen jacket and knickers, an Eton collar with a tie, and a decent manly haircut. Sorry, pages. Thoughts, I realized, all too similar to those of my brother Sherlock upon meeting me. Poor lost Lord Tewkesbury, you mean? Aye, his mother has kept him a baby. One hears she's wild with grief, unfortunate lady. I pushed back my chair, left a halfpenny on the table, exited the tea shop, and, after entrusting my carpetbag to a porter at the railway station, walked towards Basilweather Park. This would be far better than searching for bright pebbles and birds' nests. Something truly valuable was to be found, and I wanted to find it. And I believed perhaps I could. I knew where Lord Tewkesbury might live. I just knew, although I did not know how to prove it. All the way up the long drive lined with giant poplar trees, I walked in a kind of trance, imagining where he might have gone. The first gate stood open, but at the second gates a lodge-keeper stopped me, his duty being to keep out the idle curious, newspaper reporters and the like. He asked me, "Your name, ma'am?" "Enola Holmes," I said without thinking. Instantly I felt so inexcusably stupid. I wanted to expire on the spot. Running away, I had of course chosen a new name for myself. Ivy Michel. Ivy for fidelity to my mother, Michel as a kind of cipher. Take Holmes, divide it into Hol, space mes, reverse it into mess hole, mess shoal, then spell it the way it was pronounced, Michel. It would be a rare soul who could connect me with anyone else in England. Are you related to the Sussex Michels of Tottering Heath? Much less to anyone named Holmes. Ivy Michel. So clever, Ivy Michel, and now, like an imbecile, I had told this lodge-keeper Enola Holmes. Judging by his blank face, the name meant nothing to him. Yet, if any fox hunt after me had begun, the view halloo had not yet reached this area or this man. "And your business here, Mrs. Holmes?" he asked. Having been a fool, I decided I might as well make the most of it. I said, as Mr. Sherlock Holmes could not himself attend to this matter, he asked me to come and have a look about. The lodge-keeper brows lurched, and he blurted, "You're related to the detective, ma'am?" "Indeed," I replied, my tone quelling as I swept past him marching into Basilweather Park. The hall, rising before me at the circular end of the drive, would have held 10 of Ferndale, but I did not approach its wide marble steps or its pillared pages are sticking together. Pillared doors. My interest did not lie in that noble residence, nor in the formal gardens all around it, studded with topiaries and glittered with well-disciplined roses. Veering away from the drive, I walked across an expanse of lawn toward Basilweather Park proper, That is to say, the woodlands surrounding the hall and gardens. Not forest, woodlands. Stepping beneath the trees, expecting to meet a few thickets, a patch of moss or two, some kindred brambles, I found instead soft grass trimmed short enough to play croquet upon. A tame place, this. Walking along, I discovered no interesting hollows, dells, or grottos. Basil Weathers Hall's estate was flat and featureless. How disappointing, I thought as I emerged into the lawn again. The only possibility might be, "Mrs. Holmes!" cried a wild soprano voice, and I turned to see the distraught mother, the Duchess, hurtling towards me. I knew it was she because of the richness of her day dress, the heavy braiding and embroidery on her silver-gray caplet over a gown of shirred mauve, drawn back from a pleated underskirt of rose-gray satin. But there was nothing of richness in the tears stark on her staring face, and nothing of the nobility in the way she flew at me between the trees like a bloodied swan, wings of nearly white hair falling out from under her hat to flap about her shoulders. A pair of frightened-looking maids came hurrying up behind her. In their aprons and white lace caps, they must have run straight out of the house after her. "Your Grace," they cried coaxing, "Your Grace, please come in, do, and have a cup of tea. Please, it's going to rain." But the Duchess seemed not to hear them. "Mrs. Holmes!" I felt her bare hands trembling as she grasped at me. "You are a woman with a woman's heart. Tell me who could have done this evil thing. Where could my Tukey be? What am I to do?" Holding her quivering hands in both my own, I felt grateful for the heavy veil hiding my dismayed face, grateful for the gloves that separated my warm flesh from hers, so cold. "Have courage, Your Grace, and, I fumbled for words. "Be of good hope." Then I could blunder on. "Let me ask you this. Was there anywhere—" The way she doted on him, she might have spied or surmised. "A place on the grounds where your son would go to be alone." To be alone? Her swollen, red-rimmed eyes blinked at me utterly without comprehension. "Whatever do you mean?" "Sheerest nonsense," proclaimed a resonant alto voice behind me. "This insignificant widow knows nothing. I will find the lost child, Your Grace." Turning, I found myself looking at the most extraordinary woman, even taller than I, and far bulkier, shockingly hatless and uncoiffed. Her wiry hair spread about her head, shoulder to shoulder, for all the world as if she were a white lamp, and her hair a red shade, not chestnut, not auburn, but true red, almost scarlet, the color of a poppy blossom, while her eyes glared out of her rice-powdered face as sooty dark as a poppy's black heart. So arresting were her hair and face that I barely noticed her clothing. I have only a vague impression of cotton, perhaps from Egypt or India, in some barbaric crimson pattern, petaled around her massive body as wildly as the poppy-hued hair around her face. The Duchess gasped. "Madame Layla! Oh, you've come, as I begged you to, Madame Layla!" Madame what? Madame Spiritualist Medium? I surmised, this being the one role in which women, the morally and spiritually superior gender, commanded greater respect than men. But such characters, or charlatans, as my mother would have it, or charlatans, as my mother would have it, evoked the spirits of the dead, and surely the Duchess most fervidly hoped her son was not one of those. So what was this oversized female doing? "Madame Layla Sybil de Papaver, astral purgatorian, at your service," the statuesque one proclaimed. "Whatever is lost I can surely find, for the spirits go everywhere, know all, see all, and they are my friends." The Duchess now seized upon this woman's large yellow-gloved hands, while I, like the two meek maids, stood there, with my mouth airing, thunderstruck. But, in my case, not by this woman's grotesque appearance, nor by her talk of spirits. While I wanted to believe that I would somehow persevere after my corporal body was gone, I imagined that if it were so, I would have better things to do than knock on furniture, ring bells, and shake tables. Nor did the word astral impress me. Of all that Madame Layla Sybil de Papaver had said, it was a single word that rendered me motionless and speechless. That word. Purgatorian. From the Latin perditus, meaning lost. Purgatorian, one who divines that which is lost. But how dare she, with all her blather of spirits, title herself so nobly? Knower of the lost, wise woman of the lost, finder of the lost, that was my calling. I was a Purgatorian, or I would be, not astral, professional, the world's first professional, logical, scientific Purgatorian. All in one gasping breath of inspiration I knew, this as surely as I knew my real name was Holmes. I scarcely noticed how the maids escorted the Duchess and Madame Layla into the hall, perhaps for tea, perhaps for a séance, I did not care. Back in the woodlands that encircled Basilweather Park, I walked at random, oblivious to the drizzle that had begun to fall, my thoughts running wild with excitement, building upon my original scheme to find Mum. That plan remained simple. Upon arriving in London, I would hail a cab, tell the driver to take me to a respectable hotel, and have dinner and a good night's sleep. Staying in the hotel until I found suitable lodgings, I would set up bank accounts. No, first I would go to Fleet Street and place encrypted personals in the publications I knew Mum read. Wherever she was, would she not continue to read her favorite journals? Of course. I would wait until Mum replied. Just wait. That would suffice. If, as I often found it necessary to reassure myself, if indeed Mum was alive and well. In any event, wait was all I could do. Or so I had thought. But now that I had found my calling in life, I could do so much more. Let my brother Sherlock be the world's only private consulting detective all he liked. I would be the world's only private consulting Praetorian. As such, I could associate with professional women who met in their own tea rooms around London, women who might know Mum, and with the detectives of Scotland Yard, where Sherlock had already filed an inquiry concerning Mum, and with other dignitaries, and also perhaps with disreputable persons who had information to sell, and, oh, the possibilities! I was born to be a Praetorian, a finder of loved ones lost, and I ought to stop dreaming about it and start doing it, right now. The only possibility, as I had been thinking before I was interrupted, seemed to be perhaps a tree. Backtracking through the boringly well-tended woodlands of Basilweather Park, I concentrated now on looking for that particular tree. It would be located not too near Basilweather Hall and its formal garden, and not too near the edge of Basilweather Park either, but in the middle of the woods, where adult eyes would be least likely to spy, and like my refuge under the overhanging willow in Ferndale's Fern Dell, it had to be distinctive in some way, different, worthy of being a hideaway. The thin rain had stopped, the sun had come out, and I had nearly circled the estate before I found it. It was not one tree, actually, but 4 growing from a single base. 4 maple seedlings had planted themselves in the same place, and all had survived to form a symmetrical cluster whose 4 trunks rose at a steep angle from one another with a perfect square of space in between. Planting one booted foot upon a gnarl and grasping a handy bough, I swung myself up to stand perhaps 3 feet above the ground inside the encompassing V's of the trunk, a perfect axis at the hub of a 4-square leaf-encircled universe. Delightful. Even more delightful, I saw that someone, presumably Lord Tewkesbury, had been here also. He had hammered a large nail, a railroad spike actually, into the trunk of one of the trees on the inside. No one walking by was likely to notice, but there it sturdily jutted. To hang something upon? No, a much smaller nail would have served that purpose. I knew what this spike was for. To set one's foot upon. To climb. Oh, glorious day, to climb a tree once again after so many weeks of ladylike confinement. But oh, consternation, for what if anyone observed me? A widow lady in a tree? I looked all around, saw no one, and decided to chance it. Ridding myself of my hat and veil, concealing them in the leaves overhead, I hoisted my skirt and petticoats into a bunch above my knees, securing it with hat-pins. Then, setting my foot upon the spike and seizing a branch, up I went. Twigs snagged my hair, but I didn't care. Except for the usual jabs in the face, it was easy as climbing a ladder. A good thing, as my sore limbs protested every inch of the way. But Lord Tewkesbury, happily for me, had driven railroad spikes wherever no maple boughs presented themselves. Brilliant lad, this young Viscount. No doubt he had obtained the spikes from the tracks that ran past his father's estate. I hope no trains had derailed on his account. After I'd climbed 20 feet or so, I stopped to see where I was going. I tilted my head back. Good heavens! He had built a platform in the tree. A structure not at all visible from the ground, when the trees were in leaf, but from my perch I could admire it clearly enough. A square framework made of scraps of unpainted lumber set between the 4 maples. Supporting beams ran from trunk to trunk, wedged into place on tree limbs or else secured with cord lashed around the corners. Planks lay across the beams to form a crude sort of floor. I imagined him scavenging that wood from cellars or stable lofts or goodness knew where, dragging it here, and maybe creeping out at night to lift it to the tree with a rope and set it in place. And all the time his mother applying the curling tongs to his hair, and clothing him in satin, velvet, and lace. Heaven have mercy. In one corner of the platform he had left an opening by which to enter. As I popped my head through, my respect for young Lord Tewkesbury only increased. He had suspended a square of canvas, perhaps a wagon cover, as a roof over his hideaway. In the corners he had placed saddle blankets presumably borrowed from the stable, folded to serve as cushions to sit upon. Into the 4 tree trunks he had driven nails from which hung loops of knotted cord, pictures of boats, a metal whistle, all sorts of interesting things. I crawled in to look. But at once my attention was arrested by a shocking sight in the middle of the plank floor. Scraps, fragments, ragtag bits cut and torn so dreadfully that it took me a moment to recognize what they were. Black velvet, white lace, baby blue satin, remains of what had once been clothing, and atop that heap of ruins hair, long curled locks of golden hair. He must have shorn his head to stubble. After ripping his finery to shreds, Viscount Tewkesbury had entered his refuge, of his own free will. No kidnapper would have or could have brought him here, and by the looks of things, Viscount Tewkesbury had left his hideaway as he had come, of his own free will, but no longer to be Viscount Tewkesbury, Marquess of Basilweather. That's the end of that chapter. I'm going to catch up on all this chat. Oh, thanks for hosting me, Tara. I'm sorry I missed that. When Calls the Heart is definitely an embarrassing TV show. I'm sorry, Tori. Oh, Madeline's hat? That hat back there? Yeah, it's, the brim isn't the same all the way around. I read the book when I was little, and then there was a movie that was based on, literally it was like the book there was a narrator that pretty much read the book, and all the pictures on the cartoon were, straight out of the book. I remember that one. Yes, they did dress in yellow. Mm. Google knows all. Just reading your chat. Sorry, guys. I don't think Fleet Street is like their Wall Street, but I don't know. I really don't know. Yeah, so I'm curious to know the answer, Tara. If you have the answer, I would like to know it. Yeah, that hat, last time I streamed in my room, CJ saw that hat and he wanted me to put it on, and I wouldn't put it on. So, now I feel like I can't ever put it on stream because it's like a stubborn game now. But it is on Lombard Street, but it's referred to as the City of London, or the City for short. So their street is named the City, or their stock market is called the City of London, because the City of London is an actual city in England. So it's interesting. Their stock market. Okay. Gotcha. That would be confusing. But I guess you could say that Wall Street is confusing because it's an actual street. But when you talk about Wall Street, nobody ever means like the actual road. So, sorry, I'm going to drink some water real quick. Yeah, so there's 6 books total in this series. So, I'd like to eventually read through all of them. So, if you like them, let me know. If you don't like them, let me know. because, you know. Yeah, Sweeney Todd, I feel like that's just, Fleet Street just makes me think of Sweeney Todd as well. So, I really think that my next, after I think I'm going to finish this book, and then, finish this book, and then go back and do a recap stream, and it will probably just be called Recap Stream, so you guys are welcome to watch that stream when it happens. You're welcome to watch it and come in and join and see it, but it just, as a heads up, whenever that stream happens, I'm literally just going to reread the first 5 chapters, because that's where I left off. And then that way I can put them on YouTube, and everybody can, you know, as I continue through the series, if people don't have a chance to be there for every one, they can at least have something to catch up on. Alrighty. Sorry, I'm checking to see how many chapters are in this book. It's 15 chapters with an epilogue, so I'm gonna press on. Oh, whoops. Chapter the 10th. On the ground again, with my skirts down where they belonged, my black hat pinned in place to cover my unkempt head, and my veil pulled down to conceal my face, I walked blindly. I did not know what to do. Around one gloved forefinger I twisted a lock of long, blonde, curled hair. The rest I had left where I had found it. I imagined the wild birds taking it away strand by strand to line their nests. I thought of the mute, enraged message the runaway boy had left in his secret sanctuary. I thought of the tears I had seen on his mother's face. Poor lady. But equally, poor lad, made to wear velvet and lace, almost as bad as a steel-ribbed corset. Not at all incidentally I thought of myself. I, Enola, on the run, just like Lord Tewkesbury, except that it was to be hoped he'd had the sense to change his name. Fool that I'd been, coming here as Enola Holmes. I'd put myself in jeopardy. I needed to get away. Still, I must reassure the unfortunate Duchess. No, I should leave Basilweather Park as quickly as possible, before— Mrs. Holmes? Stiffening, I found myself on the carriage drive directly in front of Basilweather Hall, uncertain whether to advance or retreat when a voice called me from above. Mrs. Holmes? Hiding the lock of blonde hair in the palm of one hand, I turned to see a man in a traveling cloak hurrying down the marble steps towards me. One of the detectives from London. Excuse me for presuming upon your acquaintance, he said when he stood before me, but the lodge-keeper informed us you were here, and I wondered— He was a small, weasel-like man, hardly the muscular sort one expected of a police department, yet fearsome in the way his beady eyes peered at me, like shiny black ladybugs trying to curl right through my veil. In a rather high-pitched voice he went on, I am acquaintance of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. My name is Lestrade. How do you do? I did not offer to shake hands. Very well, thank you. I must say it is an unexpected pleasure to meet you. His tone hinted for information. He knew my name was Enola Holmes. He could see that I was a widow. Therefore, he titled me Mrs., but if I were merely related by marriage to the Holmes family, he must have been thinking, why would Sherlock send me in his stead? I must say Holmes has never mentioned you to me. Indeed. Politely I nodded. And have you discussed your family with him? No, there has not been occasion. Of course not. My tone remained, I hope, bland, but my thoughts twittered like a chaffinch. This snoop would tell Sherlock he had met me, and under what circumstances at his first opportunity. No, worse. As an inspector for Scotland Yard, at any minute he might receive a wire concerning me. I had to get away before that happened. He seemed suspicious of me already. I had to distract Inspector Lestrade from inspecting me. Opening my gloved hand, I uncoiled a lock of fair hair and held it out to him. Regarding Lord Tewkesbury, I said in a commanding manner, mimicking that of my famous brother, he has not been kidnapped. I waved aside the inspector's attempt to protest. He has taken matters into his own hands. He has run away. You would too if you were dressed like a doll in a velvet suit. He wants to go to sea, on a boat. A ship, I mean. In the young Viscount's hideaway I had seen pictures of steamships, clipper ships, all sorts of seafaring vessels. In particular, he admires that huge monstrosity, the one that looks like a floating cattle trough with sails on top and paddle wheels on the sides. What's its name? The one that laid the transatlantic cable? But Inspector Lestrade's gaze remained riveted upon the blonde curling tresses in my hand. He babbled, What? Where? How do you deduce? The Great Eastern. At last I remembered the name of the world's largest ship. You will find Lord Tewkesbury at Seaport, probably the docks of London, in all likelihood applying for a berth as a seaman or a cabin boy, as he has been practising tying sailors' knots. He has cut his hair. He must have gotten some common clothing somehow, perhaps from the stable boys. You might want to question them. After such a transformation, I imagine no one at the station recognized him if he went by train. But the broken door! The forced lock! He did that so you would search for a kidnapper rather than a runaway. Rather mean of him, I admitted, to worry his mother so. This thought made me feel better about telling what I knew. Perhaps you could give her grace this. I thrust the lock of hair at Inspector Lestrade. Although truly I do not know whether it will help her feel better or make her feel worse. Gawking at me, Inspector Lestrade seemed barely to know what he was doing as his right hand rose to accept the tresses of a duke's son. But where did you find this? With his other hand he reached for me as if to grip me by the elbow and draw me into Basilweather Hall. Stepping back, away from his grasp, I became aware of a third party to the conversation. At the top of the marble stairway, looming amid whoa, jeez. There's so many British words in this book. Looming amid balustrades and Grecian columns, Madame Layla watched and listened. I lowered my voice to answer Inspector Lestrade quite softly. In the first floor, so to speak, of a maple tree with 4 trunks. I pointed in its direction, and as he turned to look, I walked away, rather more quickly than a lady should, down the drive towards the gates. "Mrs. Holmes!" he shouted after me. Without altering the rhythm of my pace or looking back, I lifted one hand in a polite but dismissive wave, imitating the way my brother had waggled his walking stick at me. Restraining an impulse to run, I kept walking. When I had passed through the gates, I breathed out. Not having ridden a train before, I was surprised to find the second-class passenger car divided into little parlors for 4 people each, with other leather seats facing each other as in a carriage. I had imagined something more open, like an omnibus, but not so. A conductor led me down a narrow aisle, opened a door, and willy-nilly I found myself compartmented with 3 strangers, taking the one remaining place which faced the rear of the train. Moments later I felt myself being carried, slowly at first, but moment by moment accelerating, backwards, towards London. All too apt a position, as Inspector Lestrade had so reversed my affairs that I could no longer foresee what lay ahead. Since he had talked with a nitwit widow named Enola Holmes and would tell my brother Sherlock, I needed to abandon my nearly perfect disguise. Indeed, I needed to completely reconsider my situation. Sighing, perched on the edge of my seat because of my bustle, or rather luggage, I braced myself against my backwards progress. The train lurched and swayed as it rumbled along at least twice as fast as any bicycle had ever skimmed down any hill. Trees and buildings whipped past the window at a speed so tumultuous that I had to avoid looking out. I felt a bit ill for more than one reason. My safe and comfortable plans for a cab, hotel, genteel lodgings, and quiet waiting would no longer serve. I had been identified, seen. Either Lestrade or my brother Sherlock would trace a young widow's steps through Belvedere and find that I had gotten into the afternoon express train to the city. So much for misdirecting my brothers towards Wales. Although they could have no idea of my financial well-being, nevertheless, they would know now that I had gone to London, and there was nothing I could do about it. Except leave London as soon as I arrived by the next train to anywhere? But surely my brother would inquire of the ticketing agents, and now my black dress marked me. If Sherlock Holmes found that a widow had gotten on the train to, say, Houndstone, Rockingham, and Puddingsworth, he would investigate, and surely he would find me more easily in Houndstone, Rockingham, Puddingsworth, or any such place than in London. Moreover, I wanted to go to London. Not that I thought Mother was there, quite the opposite, actually, but I would best be able to find her from there. And I had always dreamt of London. Palaces, fountains, cathedrals, theatres, operas, gentlemen in tails, and ladies dripping with diamonds. Also, and rumbling backwards toward the great city, I found myself smiling beneath my veil at this thought. The idea of hiding beneath my brothers' noses appealed all the more now that they knew. I would revise their opinion of the cranial capacity of their accidental young sister. Very well. London it was. But circumstances had changed so that I could not, upon arriving in the city, take a cab. Sherlock Holmes would inquire of the cab drivers. Therefore I would have to walk. And night was coming on. But surely I could not now allow myself a hotel room. Surely my brother would inquire at all the hotels. I would have to walk for quite a distance to get myself well away from the railway station, but where to go? If I took the wrong street, I might find myself in company with someone who was not a nice sort of person. I might encounter a pickpocket, or perhaps even a cutthroat. Most unpleasant. And just as I thought this, averting my eyes from the dizzying scene outside the train's window, I glanced up instead at the glass in the corridor door. I very nearly screamed. There, like a full moon rising, a large face peered into the compartment. With his nose actually pressed against the glass, the man looked in, scanning each occupant in turn. With no change in his cold expression, he fixed his shadowy gaze on me. Then he turned away and moved on. Gulping, I looked around at my fellow passengers to see whether they too were frightened. It appeared not. In the seat next to me, a workman in a cap sprawled snoring, his rough square-toed boots thrust out in the middle of the floor. Opposite him, a fellow in a shepherd's plaid trousers and a Homburg hat studied a newspaper which, judging by the etchings of jockeys and horses, concerned itself with the racetrack. And next to him, opposite me, a squat old woman fixed me with her cheery gaze. "Something the matter, Ducky?" she inquired. Ducky? A most peculiar mode of address, but I let it pass, asking merely, "Who was that man?" "What man, Dux?" Either she hadn't seen him at all, or it was perfectly normal for a large bald man wearing cloth caps to peer into railroad parlors, and I was being a fool. Shaking my head dismissively, I murmured, "No harm done," although my heart declared me a liar. "You're looking a bit white under all that black," my new acquaintance declared. Common, toothless crone, instead of a proper hat she wore a huge old-fashioned bonnet with a brim that flared like a fungus, tied with an orange ribbon under her bristly chin. Instead of a dress, she wore a fur wrap, gone half-bald, a blouse somewhat less than white, and an old purple skirt with a new braid stuck on its faded hem. Peering at me like a robin hopeful of crumbs, she coaxed, "Yours a recent loss, Ducky?" Oh, she wanted to know about my fictitious dear-departed husband. I nodded. "And now you're bound ter London?" Nod. "It's the old story, isn't it, Dux?" The vulgar old woman leaned towards me with as much glee as pity. "Catched yourself a likely un. Ye did, but now he's died." Such was the brutal word she used. "Gone and died on ye, he has, and left ye without the means to feed yourself. And ye, as you're looking so sick, maybe wit his, oh jeez. And ye, as you're looking so sick, maybe wit his child in your belly." At first I could scarcely understand, then never having heard anything so unwhisperable stated out loud, and in a public place, yet in the presence of men, although neither of them seemed to notice, I found myself shocked speechless. A fiery flush heated my face. My friendly tormentor seemed to consider my blush to be affirmation. Nodding, she leaned even closer to me. "And now you're thinking ye can find yourself summat to support ye in the city. Have ye ever been to London before, my dear?" I managed to shake my head. "Well, don't be making the old mistake, Ducky, no matter what the gentleman's promise." She leaned closer as if telling me a great secret, yet did not lower her voice. "If ye need a few pennies to your pocket, here's the dodge. Take a petticoat or two out from under your dress." I truly thought I would faint. The workman blessedly snored on, but the other man unmistakably lifted his newspaper to hide his face. "Won't never miss 'em," the toothless crone gabbled on. "Why, many's a woman in London hain't got a petticoat to her name, and ye with half a dozen, I warrant, by the puffin' and rustlin' of 'em." I desperately wanted the journey and this ordeal to end so much that I risked a look at the window. Houses upon houses whisked past the glass now, and taller buildings pressed together brick to stone. "Take 'em to Colhane's used clothing on St. Tooken's Lane off Kipple Street," relentlessly continued the hag, whose squat presence now reminded me of more of a toad than a robin. "Down in the East End, you know. You can smell your way there by the docks. And mind, once you find St. Tooken's Lane, don't go to one of them other dealers, but straight to Colhane's, where you'll get a fair sum for your petticoats if 'em's real silk." The man with the newspaper rattled it and cleared his throat. Gripping the edge of my seat, I leaned away from the shocking hag as far as my bustle would allow. "Thank you," I muttered, for while I had no intention of selling my petticoats, nevertheless this dreadfully common old woman had helped me. I'd been wondering how I was to dispose of my widow's clothing and get something else. Of course I had plenty of money in order to get anything I wanted, but the construction of clothing takes time. Moreover, surely my brother would inquire of the established seamstress, and surely I would be remembered if, all clad in black, I were fitted for anything except more black, or grey with perhaps a touch of lavender or white. After the first year in mourning, that was all one was supposed to wear. Yet, given my brother's cleverness, none of that would do. I could not merely modify my appearance, I needed to transform it completely. But how? Pluck garments off washing lines? Now I knew. Used clothing shops. St. Tooken's Lane off Kipple Street in the East End. I did not think my brother was likely to inquire there. Nor did I think, as I should have, that I would risk my life venturing there. That's the end of that chapter. Oh, thanks for coming, Terror. Have a good rest of your day. Hope you can catch up soon. Oh, thanks, Riddy. Thanks for clapping. I thought you disappeared. You went missing. We had to find you. getting dark, so I'm going to turn this light on over here. Pull my shade down. Bum, 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 bum. Thanks for clapping, Tori. You're my best friend. So thanks. Had to devise a pulley system is all. Oh, sounds interesting. I hope it was successful. Hope you had a successful pulley system. Alright. So, been going live for about 45 minutes. So I think I'm going to keep going, if that's okay with you guys. Yeah, I think I'm going to keep going, if you're good with that. My voice is getting all scratchy. Yay for keeping going. Oh, thanks. More reading. What if I read like this? What if that was my thing that I read and you couldn't see my face? So, you probably couldn't hear me very well though, so that probably wouldn't be a good idea. Alright. Chapter the 11th. I always sit with my legs crossed. I don't know why. I feel like it gets me ready. It gets me in the zone. I don't think you guys can hear that, but I think the skies just opened up. Hold on. Yep. It is pouring down rain. Alright. Ed Sheeran. You know, I gotta say, I'm really not a fan of Ed Sheeran. Sorry. Haters gonna hate. But he's just not my cup of tea. So, for me, that sounds really sad if somebody's blasting Ed Sheeran. But if you like Ed Sheeran, then I guess it's a good thing. It's a good day. So, anyways. Alright. Chapter the 11th. From my seat on the train, I caught only fleeting glimpses of London, but when I emerged from Aldersgate Station, meaning to walk briskly away, instead I stood for a moment gazing at a metropolis so dense and vast. All around me towered a man-made wilderness, buildings taller and more forbidding than any trees that ever were. My brothers lived here? In this grotesque Briskenstone parody of any world I had ever known? With so many chimney pots and roof peaks looming dark against a lurid vaporous orange sky? Lead-colored clouds hung low while the setting sun oozed molten light between them. The Gothic towers of the city stood festive yet foreboding against that glowering sky, like candles on the devil's birthday cake. I stared until I grew aware of hordes of indifferent city dwellers brushing past me, going about their business. Then I took a deep breath, closed my mouth, swallowed, and turned my back to this curiously ominous sunset. Here in London, just as anywhere else, I told myself, the sun went down in the west. Therefore, forcing my flabbergasted limbs to move, I walked down a broad avenue leading in the opposite direction, for I wanted to go east, towards the used clothing stores, the docks, the poor streets, the East End. Within a few blocks I walked into narrow streets shadowed by crowded buildings. Behind me the sun sank. In the city night no stars or moon shone, but swatches of yellow light from shop windows draped the pavement, seeming to drag down the intervening darkness all the blacker. Darkness out of which passerbys appeared like visions, vanishing again in a few steps. Like figures out of a dream, where they appeared and disappeared on the corners, where gas street lamps cast wan skirts of light. Or figures out of a nightmare. Rats darted in and out of the shadows, bold city rats that did not run away as I walked by. I tried not to look at them, tried to pretend they were not there. I tried not to stare at an unshaven man in a crimson cravat, a starveling boy with his clothing in rags, a great brawny man wearing a bloodied apron, a barefoot gypsy woman on a corner. So there were gypsies in London too, but not the proud nomads of the country. This was a dirty beggar, all grimed like a chimney sweep. This was London? Where were the theaters and the carriages, the jeweled ladies in fur wraps and evening gowns, the gold-studded gentlemen in white ties and cutaway tails? Instead, like a kind of walking doghouse, along came a pale man wearing signboards front and back. For irreproachable hair gloss, use Van Kemp's oil of Macassar. Dirty children swirled around him, taunting, knocking his dented derby off his head. A capering girl shrieked at him. "Where do you keep the mustard?" Evidently a great joke, for her mates laughed like little banshees. The dark streets ran with such noise, shopkeepers roaring at the street urchins, "Be off with you!" while wagons rattled past and a fishmonger cried, "Fresh haddock for your supper!" and sailors shouted greetings to one another. From an unswept doorway a stout woman shrieked, "Sarah! Willie!" I wondered if her children were tormenting the bored man. Meanwhile, folk brushed past me, chattering in vulgarly loud voices, and I walked faster as if I could somehow escape. What with so many strange sights and so much commotion, small wonder I didn't hear the footsteps following me. I did not notice until the night deepened and darkened, or so it seemed at first, but then I realized it was the streets themselves that had grown grimmer. No more shops gave light, only glaring public houses on the corners, their drunken noise spilling into the darkness. I saw a woman standing in a doorway with her face painted, red lips, white skin, black brows, and I guessed I was witnessing a lady of the night. In her tawdry, low-cut gown, she reeked so badly of gin I could smell it even above the stench of her seldom-washed body. But she was not the only source of odor. The whole east end of London stank of boiled cabbage, coal smoke, dead fish along the nearby Thames, sewage in the gutters, and people in the gutters. I saw a man lying drunk or sick. I saw children huddled together like puppies to sleep, and I realized they had no homes. My heart ached. I wanted to awaken those children and give them money to buy bread and meat pies, but I made myself walk on, lengthening my stride. Uneasy. Some sense of danger. A dark form crawled along the pavement in front of me. Crawled, on her hands and knees, her bare feet dragging. I faltered to a halt, struck motionless and witless by the sight of an old woman reduced to such wretchedness, with only a single torn and threadbare dress inadequately covering her, no underpinnings beneath it, nothing on her head either, not even so much as a rag of cloth, and no hair. Only a mass of sores covered her scalp. I choked back a cry at the sight, and dully, creeping at a snail's pace on her knuckles and her knees, she lifted her head a few inches to glance at me. I saw her eyes, pallid like gooseberries. But I had stood still a moment too long. Heavy footsteps sounded behind me. I leapt forward to flee, but it was too late. The footfalls rushed upon me. An iron grip grasped my arm. I started to scream, but a steely hand clamped over my mouth, very close to my ear. A deep voice growled, "If you move or cry out, I will kill you." Terror froze me. Wide-eyed, staring into the darkness, I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. As I stood gasping, his grip left my arm and snaked around me, clasping both arms forcibly to my sides, pressing my back against a surface that might as well have been a stone wall had I not known it to be his chest. His hand left my mouth, but with an instant before my trembling lips could shape a sound, in the dim light I saw this glint of steel, long, tapering to the point like a shard of ice, a knife blade. Dimly also I saw the hand that held the knife, a large hand in a kid-skin glove of some tawny color. "Where is he?" the man demanded, his tone most menacing. What? Where was who? I could not speak. "Where is Lord Tewkesbury?" It made no sense. Why would a man in London be accosting me about the noble runaway? Who could know I had been in Belvedere? Then I remembered the face I had seen pressed against the glass peering into the train compartment. "I will ask you once more, and once only," he hissed. "Where is Viscount Tewkesbury, Marquess of Basilweather?" It must by then have been past midnight. Shouts blurred by Aylestale rang from the public houses along with bawdy off-key singing, but the cobblestones and pavements stood empty. What I could see of them. Anything could have lurked in the shadows, and this was not the sort of place where one could hope for help. I managed to stammer. "I have no idea." The knife blade flashed under my chin, where through my high collar I could feel its pressure against my throat. Gulping, I closed my eyes. "No games," my captor warned. "You are on your way to him. Where is he?" "You are mistaken." I tried to speak coolly, but my voice shook. "You are laboring under some absurd delusion. I know nothing of—" "Liar." I felt murder in his arm muscles. The knife jumped, jerked in his hand, slashing at my throat, finding instead the whalebone of my collar. With what could have been my last breath, I screamed. Twisting in the cutthroat's grip, flailing, and I lashed upwards and backwards with my carpet-bag, feeling it hit his face before it flew out of my grasp. He cursed fearsomely, but although his hold on me loosened, he did not let go. Shrieking, I felt his long blade stab at my side, strike my corset, then stab again, seeking passageway to my flesh. Instead, it slit my dress, it slit my dress, a long, ragged wound, as I tore away from him and ran. I cried, "Help! Someone help me!" Blundering into the darkness, running, I knew not where. "In here, ma'am," said a man's voice, high and squeaky out of the shadows. Someone had, after all, heard me crying for help. Nearly sobbing with relief, I turned towards the voice, plunging down a narrow, steep alley between buildings that reeked of tar. "This way." I felt his skinny hand take my elbow, guiding me a crooked way towards something that glimmered in the night. The river. My guide pushed me into a narrow wooden walkway that shifted beneath my feet. Some instinct, a misgiving, made me balk, my heart beating harder than ever. "Where are we going?" I whispered. "Just do as you're told." And in less time it takes to tell me, he had twisted my arm behind my back, shoving me forward towards I knew not what. "Stop it!" I braced the heels of my boots against the plank, suddenly more furious than afraid. I had, after all, been mauled about, had lost my carpet-bag, had been threatened by a knife, my clothing ruined, my plans also in tatters, and now the one whom I thought to be my rescuer seemed to be turning into a new enemy. I became wrought. "Stop, villain!" I shouted as loudly as I could. "Hold your tongue!" Twisting my arm painfully, he gave a hard shove. I could not help stumbling forward, but I continued to call out, "Curses, let go of me!" Something heavy clouded me over my right ear. I fell sideward into darkness. It is not fair to say that I fainted. I have never fainted, and I hope I never do. Say, rather, that for some time I was knocked out of my senses. When I blinked and opened my eyes, I found myself awkwardly half-sitting, half-lying on an odd sort of curved plank floor, my hands bound behind my back and my ankles similarly tied, with rough hemp cord in front of me. Swinging from a crude plank ceiling close overhead, an oil lamp gave off a hot, choking odor as it leaked a dim light. I saw big stones grouped around turpentine-colored water near my feet, as if an awful travesty of my favorite dell at home. The floor seemed to move beneath me. I felt lightheaded. Closing my eyes, I waited for my sickness to pass. But it did not pass. My sense of movement, I mean. And I realized I was lightheaded only because my captor, whoever he was, had taken my hat away, probably for fear of its pins. My head, clad only in its own snaggled hair, felt exposed, and my world seemed to jolt and rock, but I was not ill. I was, rather, lying in the cellar of a boat. The hull, I mean. I remembered that was what they called it. While I had no experience of barges and ships and such, I had ridden in a rowboat a time or two, and I recognized the floating, bumping motion of a small craft in its stall, so to speak. In the water, but with its head tied to a post. The ceiling where the lamp swung was the underside of a deck. The filthy puddle at my feet was called the bilge, and the stones, I believed, were ballast. Opening my eyes, peering into the gloom, I scanned my shadowy prison, and I realized that I was not alone. From the opposite side of the hull, with his hands behind his back, and his bound ankles just across the bilge from mine, a boy faced me. Studied me. Scowling dark eyes. Hard jaw. Cheap, ill-fitting clothing. Bare feet that looked soft, sore, pale. An uneven stubble of fair hair. And a face I had seen before, although only upon the front page of a newspaper. Viscount Tewkesbury, Marquess of Basilweather. It's the end of chapter 11. Not the hat! No! Oh, hey! Welcome! That was a shorter chapter. I'm pretty surprised. Oh, yeah. I really like this series, I gotta say. It's a good one. Thank you. The Mary Poppins attack. Thanks, Riddy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I feel like I need to take a bow. You know, I think I might try and pound the rest of this out. This book out. I don't know. Yeah, if you guys are good to listen, I think I might try and crank the rest of this out. 12, 13, 14, 15. Yeah, I got like 4 more chapters. We'll see. So I'm gonna press. I'm gonna press on. Take a sip of water. Sorry, I got water on my laptop now. Hold on. I'm gonna move this. Okay, it's okay. We're good. How much is left? We're about to read chapter 12, and there's 15 chapters and an epilogue. Let's see, we got about this much left, right here. Chapter the 12th. But that was absurd. Impossible. He was supposed to be running away to sea. Quite without any proper introduction, I exclaimed, "What in heaven's name are you doing here?" He arched his golden brows. "You presume an acquaintance, miss?" "For mercy's sake, I presume nothing." Indignation and surprise spurred me to sit up straight, not without difficulty, and ill temper. "I know who you are, Tukey." "Don't call me that." "Very well. Lord Tuke's burial at sea. What are you doing barefoot in a boat?" One might with equal justice ask what a snip of a girl is doing all gadded up as a widow. Sharpening, his tone grew ever more aristocratic. "Oh," I shot back, "a cabin boy with an Eton accent? Oh, a widow with no wedding ring?" Not being able to see my hands bound behind my back, I hadn't realized. But now, propped up against my right bustle and working my fingers against the cords that bound my wrist, I exclaimed, "What did he take my gloves for?" "They," corrected his lordship the Viscount, "plural, 2 of them. They wanted to steal your ring and found none." Despite his arrogant lecturing air, I could see how ashen his face was, could see his lips trembling as he spoke. "They went through your pockets, too, finding a few shillings, some hairpins, 3 licorice sticks, a rather filthy handkerchief." Indeed, I tried to quell this recitation for the thought that while I was unconscious, strange men had put their hands into my pockets. The very idea made me shudder. Thankfully, they had not actually touched my person, for my improvised wearable baggage remained where it belonged. I could feel my bust enhancer, hip regulators, and dress improver occupying their positions. A comb, a hairbrush, a flowery little bouquet of some sort. My heart panged as if he'd just killed my mother before my eyes. My eyes burned, but I had to bite my lip, for this was neither the time nor the place to mourn my loss. "And, as one of your dresses sliced wide open, a glimpse of that scandalous pink corset you're wearing." Nasty boy! My misery fueled my anger. Hot with embarrassment and quivering with fury, I flared at him. "You deserve to be right where you are, bound hand and foot." "And how do you do, dear girl no older than I, deserve the same?" "Oh, and how do you, dear girl no older than I, deserve the same?" "I am older. How much older?" I told him before I remembered I must reveal my age to no one. Confound him, he was clever, and despite his bravado, frightened. As frightened as I was. After taking a deep breath, I asked him softly, "How long have you been imprisoned here?" "Only an hour or so. While the little one was snatching me, it seems the big one was following you for some reason. He broke off as heavy footsteps sounded overhead. They halted. A square of lantern light opened at the far end of our prison, and I found myself watching the rather ludicrous sight of a man appearing from the bottom up, rubber boots first, as he descended into our den by a ladder. "No more an hour ago," he said to someone up above as he climbed down. I recognized his squeaky voice. Skinny, stunted, bent, this man cowered like a much-kicked and underfed mongrel. "Found him right where you told me in your wire, mooching about the docks where they berthed the Great Eastern. We know what to do with him, but what about the girl?" "Much the same," growled the other man's voice as he descended in his turn. I knew that voice too, and watched stoically as black-booted feet were followed by hulking limbs clad in dark clothing that might once have belonged to a gentleman, although now gone to seed. His pale kid gloves I could see in the light of the lantern he bore were yellow. Many gentry, men and ladies alike, wore kid gloves, often yellow, serving to advertise a certain social class. When the back of the massive man's head came into view, however, I saw he wore not a gentleman's hat, but the cloth cap of a laborer. I was prepared, then, when he turned around and I saw his face. It was, indeed, the cold white face that had peered like a baleful moon into my railway car compartment, or a baleful white skull, as he removed his cap, and I saw he was quite bald, disgustingly so, like a maggot, except for bristles of wiry reddish hair protruding from his ears. "I thought you were after only in case I missed me mark," said the other. "To make doubly sure, yes," drawled the big bald one, "but also because she says her name is Holmes." As he spoke to his companion, he watched my face with malicious enjoyment, smirking as my eyes flew open and my jaw dropped. I could not help showing my shock, for how did he know who I was? How could he possibly know? Satisfied by my reaction, he turned back to his companion. "She says she's related to Sherlock Holmes. If that is true, there is swag to be got for her." "Why'd you try to kill her, then?" So this bulky man with the hair in his ears was, as I had surmised, the cutthroat who had attacked me. He shrugged his burly shoulders. "She vexed me," he said with chill indifference. I managed to close my gaping mouth as things began to make sense. He had been looking for me on the train. He had followed me from the station. Yet nothing made sense. Why, accosting me, had he thought I knew where Lord Tewkesbury was? Shrew. The cutthroat looked straight at me with his eyes black as ice. Something I could not think what, familiar about that glare, although I'll not deny it scared me so badly that I shook. He told me, "Girls hereabouts mostly don't have the shillings for corsets. I've sliced a few bellies wide open in my time, don't cross me again." I sat silent, unable to think of any suitable reply. In truth, frightened witless. But then the other man, the rickety one, spoilt the effect by saying to his companion, "Well, you better watch yourself and don't make Sherlock Holmes vexed either. What I hear, you don't fool with that gent." The big one turned on him. "I fool with whomever I please." His tone menaced like a knife blade. "I'm going to sleep. You guard these two." "That were my intention anyway," the other muttered, but only after the hulking brute had disappeared back up the ladder. The skinny one, the mongrel watchdog, settled himself with his back against the ladder and stared at us with vicious little eyes. I demanded of him, "Who are you?" Even in the dim light of the oil lamp I could see that his yellow grin lacked several teeth. "Prince Charmant der Horseapple, at your service," he told me. An obvious falsehood. I scowled at him. "While we're doing introductions," said Lord Tewkesbury to me, "what, pray tell, is your name?" I shook my head at him. "No talkin'," a squeaky voice said. "What," I asked him coldly, "do you and your friend intend to do with us?" "Take your dancing, dearies. I told ye no talking." Unwilling to amuse this reprehensible person any longer, I lay down sideward on the bare planks with the cut portion of my dress beneath me. I closed my eyes. It is difficult to sleep, or even pretend to sleep with one's hands tied behind one. To make matters worse, the tips of my steel corset ribs jabbed me painfully under the arms. My thoughts, as well as my body, were far from comfortable. The mention of swag indicated money, leading me to conclude that I was being held for ransom. I could not imagine a more humiliating way to be returned to my brothers, who would no doubt then send me off to boarding school with a spanking. I wondered whether they would take my money away. I wondered how the big ruffian had learned of me, to follow me, and even more appalling, had learned of Viscount Tewkesbury and wired this mongrel-like accomplice about him. I wondered what "much the same" meant. Quivering with terror, I urged myself to be alert for any chance to escape. Yet at the same time I knew it would be wise to breathe more calmly, stop trembling, muster my energy, try to sleep. Because of the shape of the boat's hull, I lay on an incline, somewhat hammock-shaped, but far from restful, even with all the padding I wore. Shifting my limbs, I tried for a less cramped position, without success because the steel ribs of my confounded corset now not only tormented my arms, but at the other end poked through the rent in my dress, reminded me all too painfully of how that cutthroat's knife had... Steel. Knife. I lay very still. Oh, if only I could do it. After a moment's thought, I opened my eyes just enough to take a peek at Squeaky the watchdog through my eyelashes. How fortunate that my modesty had made me lie upon my right side, facing him, in order to conceal my corset. He still sat with his back against the ladder, but with his head lolling, asleep. And why not, for as long as he remained in position by the ladder, how could we possibly get past him? But I would deal with that problem later. As silently as I could, I turned the upper portion of my person, trying to place my bound wrists against a protruding rib of my corset. It was not easy, as the slash in my dress was at the side, but by straining one arm to the utmost while propping myself up upon the elbow of the other, clenching my teeth to keep from making a sound, I contrived to loop the cord that bound my wrists around the tip of the steel corset stay. So twisted that I could barely move, I nevertheless managed to force back the heavily starched fabric that sheathed the steel. Then, even more contorted, I began trying to cut through the cords. Not once did I look at Lord Tewkesbury. I tried to think of him as little as possible, and then only assure myself he must be asleep. Otherwise I would have felt the mortification of my posture beyond bearing. Back and forth, with great difficulty I sawed away with my hands and arms while pressing my bound wrists against the steel. Painfully, and for quite a long time, I cannot say how many foul hours ensued, for there was no telling night from day in that hole. There was no telling either whether I was making any progress against the cords, for I could not see what I was doing. I could feel that I was cutting myself. But I clenched my jaw and bore down all the harder, my gaze fixed upon the sleeping guard, my ears straining to hear my own panting breath. I felt more than heard the lapping of waves, the slopping of bilge water, the occasional muffled bump as the boat drifted against its pier. Squeaky twitched as if pestered by a flea. I had just time to flatten myself, hands hidden from his view behind my back, before he opened his eyes. "See here," he complained, glaring at me. "What you rocking the bloody boat for?" That's the end of chapter 12. I like that a lot of books Holland likes involves boats in some way. It does in some way. I don't know, it's just destiny. I'm gonna press, if that's okay with you guys. Chapter the 13th. I froze, cowering like a rabbit in a thicket, but from the other side of the hull an imperious voice spoke. What for? I desire this boat to rock, and I demand, nay, I command this boat to rock. And rock it did, for there sat young Viscount Tewkesbury, Marquess of Basilweather, leaning back to front to back again, disturbing our prison's repose. Ye there! Squeaky's flinty stare turned to him. Stop at! Make me! Haughtily Lord Tewkesbury met his glare and kept rocking. You want me to make you? Squeaky lurched to his feet. Thinking you're a toff, do you? By jingo, I'll show you. Fist balled, he walked over to Tewkesbury, and in doing so he turned his back to me. I sat up and twisted around, leaning to one side, fumbling again to find the corset rib with my bound hands. With vicious force our captor kicked Lord Tewkesbury in the leg. The boy made no sound, but I could have cried out. I wanted to strike, seize, stop that nasty man. Indeed, I lost my head entirely, struggling against the cords that bound my wrists so wildly it seemed I could wrench my arms out of their sockets. Then something snapped. It hurt terribly. Squeaky kicked Tewkesbury again. Keep going, the boy said. I like it. But his strained voice showed that he lied. My arms hurt so badly I thought I had broken a bone, rather than the cord, until I found myself looking at my own hands, which had presented themselves in front of my face, like disreputable strangers. Battered, bloody, rags of hemp dripping from their wrists. You like it? I'll see you like it, squeaked our scurvy wretch of a guard, kicking Lord Tewkesbury for the third time, quite hard. This time Tewkey whimpered. And simultaneously I rose to my feet, my ankle still bound, but walking was not necessary as I stood directly behind our captor. My hands, which seemed to know what to do better than I did, selected a large rock from the ballast even as Squeaky cocked his leg to kick again. Before he could do so, I hoisted my primitive weapon and brought it down with great decision upon his head. He fell without a sound, splashed into the bilge water, and lay still. I stood gawking at him. Idiot, untie my hands, cried Lord Tewkesbury. The downed man continued as he was, inert, but breathing. Untie me, fool! The boy's peremptory tone prodded me into motion. I turned my back on him. Ninny, what are you doing? I was preserving my scant remaining modesty, although I did not tell him so. Unbuttoning part of my bodice, I reached down into my frontal baggage and found the penknife I had removed from my drawing kit and stowed in my bust enhancer, along with a pencil and some folded sheets of paper. After buttoning up again, I opened the penknife, stopped, and cut the cords away from my ankles. Unable to see these proceedings through my expanse of black skirt, Lord Tewkesbury stopped giving orders and actually began to beg. Please, please, I saw what you were doing and I helped you, didn't I? Please, you shh! In a moment. Once I had freed my feet, I turned, stepped past the motionless form of our guard, then leaned over the captive boy. With one quick snick, I severed the cord binding his hands behind his back. Then I handed him the knife so he could free his feet himself. On the skirt of my ruined dress, I wiped the blood from my wrists. I looked at the cuts, not so deep as to be dangerous, then felt at my hair, which had fallen out of any semblance of a bun to straggle around my shoulders. Finding a few hairpins in its tangles, I tried to close the rip in my dress with them. Do come on, urged young Viscount Tewkesbury, now on his feet with my penknife, still open, gripped like a weapon in his hand. He was right, of course. There was no time for me to make myself presentable. Nodding, I approached the ladder that led to freedom, with Lord Tewkesbury at my side as we reached it. As we reached it, however, we hesitated, eyeing each other. Ladies first? Said his lordship uncertainly. I yield in favor of the gentleman, I responded, thinking only that a girl must never place herself in such a position that a male might look up her skirt, not at all thinking of what might await us above. Nodding, still clutching the penknife, Tewkesbury climbed the ladder. Light blinded me as he lifted the hatch. Night had passed into day, whether morning or afternoon I knew not. I retain only a vague, blinking, silhouetted impression of the cautious way the young Viscount put his head forth and looked around. Quite silently he laid the hatch cover aside, climbed out, and beckoned urgently to me. Climbing as quickly as I could, I realized he was waiting for me, his hand extended to help me out of the hold. Despite having called me in close succession an idiot, a fool, and a ninny, the boy showed traces of gallantry. He would have been wiser to flee without me, but it seemed right at that, as we had been prisoners together, we would escape together. Certainly it had not occurred to me to leave him behind, and evidently he had not thought to leave me behind either. Reaching the top of the ladder, I grasped his hand. An awful voice roared a curse, such as I had never previously heard or imagined. As my head rose above the level of the hatch, I saw a tall, massive scarlet form hurtle out of the cabin and across a too brief expanse of deck towards us. In that awful moment I learned that gentlemen, or at least a certain ungentle man, wore the unmentionables of a blood-red flannel from wrist to ankle. I screamed. "Come on!" Springing to his feet, Tewksbury all but lifted me off the ladder, flinging me away from the charging red menace. "Run!" He looked as if he intended to hold the brute off with his little penknife. "You run!" Hoisting a wad of skirt and petticoat above my knees with one hand, I grabbed him by the collar with the other as I fled to the far end of the boat. Together, although necessarily I let go of him, we leapt across a yard of water to the wobbly planking of what I suppose might be called a pier. Then, hauling at my skirt with both hands, I ran as fast as I could along that narrow, unsteady path. "You won't get far," bellowed a ferocious voice from the boat. "Just wait till I get some clothes on me and my hands on you." Being long of limb, I liked to run, but not tripping over my own confounded clothing, and definitely not on a labyrinth of rotting green slimed planks. A bewilderment of piers and brackish water, wharves and catwalks, and yet more stinking water lay between us and the taverns and warehouses that rode at the edge of the Thames. "Which way?" gasped Tukey, for I could no longer think of him as a Lord Viscount Duke's son. He was my comrade now, panting along right behind me. "I can't tell." Surrounded by tar-dark water, at a dead end, we slipped and skittered, turning to dart back. Once again an arm of water blocked our way. I began to shake, for if I fell into that black river, it would be the end for me. I would drown. I doubted whether Tewksbury could swim either, but there was no time for dithering. At too scant a distance, our massive enemy sprang out of the cabin again, with some decent covering thrown onto his person this time, roaring, "I'll kill you both." Like a charging bear, he lunged from his craft into the labyrinth warp. Even worse, a small crooked form followed him the way a starving dog follows a beggar. Evidently I had not hit Squeaky hard enough. "Jump!" I wailed, with my skirts billowing. I leapt for another pier. It rocked beneath me, but I managed to keep my footing, just as I gasped for air, it rocked again. Even worse, as Tewksbury landed with a thump beside me. Lacking breath to scream outright, I squeaked like a clothesline reel. Tukey grabbed my arm, crying, "Run!" and this time he led as we fled. At some point he had lost my penknife, his right hand trembled weaponless, my shaking redoubled, for I felt the heavy tread of the cutthroat quaking the dock behind us. "Oh no!" I cried as we slid to a halt at the end of another pier that led us nowhere. Tukey said something unrepeatable. "Shame on you. This way." Turning, I took the lead again, and in a few moments at last we scrambled to firmer footing of cobbles, bricks, and mortar. But our enemies, who knew their way, reached shore just as we did, only a stone's throw behind us. I could see the blood on Squeaky's head and the rage in his squinty eyes. I could see the hair in the big cutthroat's ears, and the wrath reddening his platter face. Blood on the moon, an ill omen. I confess I screamed again. Indeed, I shrieked like a shot rabbit. Blindly, with Tukey's hand in mine, I fled up a narrow street and around the corner. "Hurry!" Zigzagging between heavy-loaded wagons drawn by the straining draft horses, we ran at an angle across the street to the next turning. By now out of breath, moist of face and dress, all too aware of the heat of the day, I could hear running footsteps following us. Tukey was dropping behind. Dragging him along, I could feel a wince of pain in his every stride. His feet, bare, sore, hitting hard on stone, and it was all uphill, fleeing from the river. "Come on!" "Can't," the boy panted, trying to yank his hand out of mine. I tightened my grip. "Indeed you can. You must. You. Go. Save yourself." "No." Blinking away my blind panic, I looked around me as we ran. We seemed to be reaching the end of wagons and docks and warehouses. Now we ran along a poor street of shabby lodgings and even shabbier businesses, a fishmonger's, a pawn shop, an umbrella mender, and street vendors. "Live mussels, live oysters, sweet ices here, cold sweet strawberry ices." There were people about, a dustman with a donkey cart, men with barrows of scrap metal, women and girls afoot in caps and aprons that should have been white but had grimed to the color of mushrooms. People, but not the sort likely to help us, and not enough of them so that a barefoot fleeing boy could escape notice, let alone a breathless, disheveled, bare-headed girl in the torn, blood-smeared dress of a widow. "Stop, thieves!" bellowed a voice behind us, hoarse but still roaring. "Stop those two scoundrels! Villains! Pickpockets!" Faces turned to stare at Tukey and me as we fled through a street of junk stores, second-hand furniture, used clothing, hats refurbished, shoes and boots resold, used clothing again. Faces seemed to rise out of a haze of heat and terror, loom for a moment, then flash by. One of the faces I knew in passing, although I could not think where I had seen it before. Then, as we ran on, I remembered. "Tukey, quick!" Dodging off the street, I darted up a narrow passageway between two ramshackle boarding houses, turned past the corner of a cowshed, and fled through the stinking mews behind the buildings, redolent of donkey, goat, goose, and hen. I turned again. "You can't get away," a fearsome voice roared from behind the cowshed, far too close for comfort. "Give up," yelled another voice, squeaky. "Idiot," Tewksbury cried, evidently addressing me. "Why are we going in a circle? They'll catch us." "You'll see. Follow me." Letting go of his hand, and also of my remaining shreds of modesty, I ripped open the buttons of my upper bodice. Running down quite a filthy alley, I thrust my forearm into my frontal baggage, and my fingers encountering a packet of crisp papers, withdrew one. Hiding it in my palm, as I rounded the final corner back into the street, I dashed towards the used clothing store. The proprietor stood outside the door, enjoying the street scene and the cooling breeze, but when she saw me making towards her, her cheery expression chilled and turned to alarm. Rather than resembling a robin or a toad, she looked like a mouse under the paw of a cat. "No!" she gasped as I ran up to her. "No! Cutter would kill me! It's more than my life is worth!" There was no time for discussion. Tukey and I had only a moment before two villains would round the corner and sight us again. In that moment I thrust a banknote for £100 into the hands of, presumably, Mrs. Culhane, grabbed Tukey by the sleeve, and dragged him with me into Culhane's used clothing emporium. It's the end of the 13th chapter. Strawberry ices. Is that like a pink wolf? Yes, it is. Welcome, Heartless. Da-da-dam! She said Thames. Isn't that how you pronounce it? Oh, thanks. Hey, Smokey. Welcome. Oh, man, I got water on the book again. Dripping. Alrighty. I got 2 chapters left. I think I'm going to press to the end here. I can't believe I just got water on the book. Thames. Like people pronounce it with the TH. Thames. The Thames River. Oh, that's too bad. Sorry about the pulley system, Riddy. Yeah. I don't blame you, Heartless. I think I would hate that too. Okay. Alrighty. Broken rope does equal boo. Bummer. Alrighty. Next chapter hype. Woo! Chapter the 14th. Gasping for breath, we darted into a gloomy, dirty, cluttered room that felt as close as an oven. From one side wall hung a number of long cloaks and mantles. For quick concealment, we pressed ourselves into their shadowy folds. Trembling, hands clenched, I watched the front door, waiting to see whether my bribe would succeed. "Hide under a table," Tukey whispered. I shook my head. Poised to flee, staring out the front door and window, I saw how folks scattered, giving way as the hulking cutthroat and his squeaky mongrel of a companion barreled down the middle of the street, glaring in all directions. I saw the big ruffian grab a loiterer by the collar, almost lifting the man off his feet, shouting into his face. The poor fellow gestured in our direction. And where Mrs. Culhane had gone I did not know, but there she was again, standing with her back to me. She looked like a plaid tortoise with a limp bow of apron strings across its middle. Our moon-faced enemy and his follower strode up to her, towered over her. Even Rickety Squeaky stood taller than she did, and I'm not sure I could have braved the ferocity of their glares. But the squat old woman occupied that doorway like a plug. I saw her shake her head. I saw her gesture towards the far end of the street. I saw the sunlit doorway as a halo of glory surrounding her. I saw the 2 villains turn away. Hanging onto somebody's old cape for support, I sagged against the wall with relief. Tukey folded like an easel sinking to the floor. Mrs. Culhane quite sensibly did not come in at once, but stood at the door for a while longer. By the time she entered I had recovered my strength, found a back room with a water tap, soaked a rectangle of faded red flannel and applied it to Tukey's face. When he sat up I transferred my attention to his suffering feet, dabbing with the rag, trying to remove dirt and blood without hurting him too much. I was studying his raw, sore soles when our toad-like savior came in, shut and locked her shop door, drew its blind, and waddled over to me. "So," she said, "one day you're a grievin' widder, and the next day it turns out you're a stringy-haired girl running from Cutter and Squeaky." "Indeed, and who might the gentleman be? We were not introduced." "I don't doubt it. That's me stomach bitter you're usin' for a rag. Binder. That's me stomach binder you're usin' for a rag." I stood up. "Merciful heavens, I think I've paid you for it." She faced me unsmiling, no cheery robin chirp in her manner or voice today, no ducky for me. She said, "What ye gave me went to the neighbors, others who saw." This, I realized, must be partly true. She had disappeared from the doorway to bargain with bystanders for their silence. But by the shrewd glint in her eye I knew it was also partly false. She had promised the neighbors some shillings or a few pounds at the very most. Still, there was something honest in the grimness of her face as she told me, "They'd best be more where that come from. Cutter would slice me inside out if I knew. If he knew, make no mistake about it, it's my life I'm risking for you." "If you provide what we need," I told her, "there will be more." So it was the next day Tukey and I slipped out of her shop by the back door, strengthened and transformed. We had taken refuge in a rather slovenly kitchen, for she lived in 3 rooms on the first floor over the shop, and we had accepted her lumpy porridge gratefully. We had slept, I on her foul-smelling sofa, Tukey on quilts on her floor. We had taken sponge baths, we had applied bag balm, ointment for cow udders, to Tukey's feet, then wrapped them in bandages. We had outfitted ourselves in apparel from Culhane's used clothing, burning our old things in the kitchen stove. We had not talked. Not even to tell one another our names. Our sour-faced hostess had asked us no questions, and we had offered no information. Tukey and I did not even converse between ourselves, lest she overhear. I did not trust her. I would not have put it beyond her to separate me from all of my money if she discovered where I kept it. Therefore, I never removed my clothing in her presence, and I never removed my corset at all, not even to sleep. That once despised garment had become my most precious possession, so long as I did not actually tighten it. Its steely protection had saved my life. Its starchy structure supported and concealed the bust enhancer, dress improver, and hip regulators that disguised both me and my financial means. I believe and hope that Mrs. Culhane, if that was indeed her name, never discovered this secret. We spoke only to conduct business. Might her shop provide a suit of clothes not too much worn for the boy, and a cap, and an ample pair of shoes, and thick socks? As for me, a blouse and a bustled or gored skirt, such as a typist or glove-counter girl might wear, made of practical material with pockets, and a jacket also with pockets, its hem flared to fit over the top of the skirt, and gloves not too spoilt, and a hat not too far out of fashion, and would she give me a bit of help with my hair? I felt naked to the eyes of the world, leaving that place without my thick black widow's veil to cover my face, but the truth was that even my own brother might not have known me. I stooped and peered nearsightedly through pince-nez eyeglasses, clipped onto my nose, perched there like a bizarre metal bird. Over the eyeglasses, a considerable fringe of false hair both decorated and hid my forehead, assisting the pince-nez in altering my profile, and over the hair I wore a straw hat trimmed with bits of lace and feathers, very much like any cheap straw hat worn by any struggling young woman in the city. Now I just need a parasol, I told Mrs. Culhane. She gave me one dyed a hideous but stylish, chemically derived green, then escorted us to her back door and held out her hand. Upon her palm I placed, as I had promised, another banknote. We exited, and she closed the door behind us without a word. Once we had achieved the street, I shuffled as I walked, acting half-blind, feeling my way with the folded parasol. I did this partly as a disguise and partly so that Tukey, whose feet were still quite sore, would not appear to struggle along, but rather to walk slowly, accompanying me for my sake. In our clothing neither new nor worn out, neither rich nor poor, I hoped we would escape anyone's attention, for I wanted no one bearing news of us to Cutter. But I need not have worried. All around us folk went noisily about their business, taking no notice of us at all. London, that great brick-and-stone cauldron of a city, seemed to always boil with swirling human activity. A man with a barrow cried, "Ginger beer! Fresh cold ginger beer to cool your dusty throat!" A water cart trundled past, followed by boys cleaning the cobbles with brooms. A delivery man pedaled by on the oddest tricycle I had ever seen, with 2 wheels to the front instead of the rear, and a great box strapped to the handlebars. On a corner stood 3 dark-haired children singing in harmony like angels in a language I did not know. The middle one, with the crockery cup extended for my penny. Just beyond and above them, a ragged man with a paste can and a brush balanced on a ladder, sticking up advertisements for shoe backing, and anti-hermetic elastic wrappings, patent safety coffins. Men in white sack jackets and white trousers nailed a quarantine notice onto the doorways of a lodging. I wondered briefly that vile fevers and diseases wafted up from the stinking Thames, and whether or not I would perish of cholera or scarlet fever for having set foot on Cutter's vessel. Cutter. Charming ruffian. In one of my pockets, along with money and various other useful items I had transferred there from my bust enhancer, I carried a list I had written in some wakeful hours during the night. Why did Cutter search the train? Why did he follow me? Why did he think I knew where to find Tukey? What did he want with Tukey? Why did he wire Squeaky to look for Tukey on the docks? What did he mean when he said, much the same? Is he in the business of kidnapping? How did he know anything about Tukey and the Great Eastern at all? How indeed, as I had told Inspector Lestrade and Madame what was her name, the astral purgatorian, had overheard. Had Inspector Lestrade told others? Perhaps eventually, but would he not have first taken steps to confirm my information? Yet that wire must have been sent to Squeaky almost immediately. Such were my thoughts as my limping escort and I walked a few blocks to a better neighborhood. Here we found a park of sorts, a patch of grass with 4 trees under which a woman trundled prams, and a man with a donkey cried, "Rides, treat your kiddies, a penny a head." Beside the park I saw stood a number of cabs. I would be able to hire one so my little lordship would not have to walk on his suffering feet. But so far much on our guard we had not spoken at all. But now we had left Cutter's haunts behind. I turned to my companion and smiled. "Well, Tukey?" I said. "Don't call me that." I bristled. Very well, Lord Tewkesbury of Basilweather or not. But my annoyance subsided as a thought struck me. I asked, "What do you want to be called? What name had you chosen for yourself when you ran off?" He shook his head and turned his face away. "Never mind. It doesn't matter any more." "Why? What are you going to do?" "I don't know." "Do you still want to go to sea?" He swiveled to stare at me. "You know everything. How do you know so much? Who are you? Are you really related to Sherlock Holmes?" I bit my lip, for I did not feel as if it would be safe to tell him anything more of myself. Already he knew too much. Luckily, at that moment a newsboy howled from the corner by the cab stand. "Read all about it! Ransom demanded for Viscount Tewkesbury Basilweather." "What?" I exclaimed. "That's preposterous." Almost forgetting to peer and shuffle, I scuttled over and bought a newspaper. "Sensational development in kidnapping case." Read the headline over once again. Tukey's portrait a la Little Lord Fauntleroy. Sitting next to me on a park bench so that we could both see the newspaper at once, Tukey made a muffled sound of dismay. "My picture?" "The whole world has viewed it," I told him with, I admit, some degree of zest. Then, as he did not immediately reply, I glanced at him to see his face an expression of fiery red, utterly anguished humiliation. "I can't go back," he said. "I'll never go back." No longer gleeful, I asked, "But what if someone recognizes the picture? Mrs. Culhane, for instance." "She? When would she ever look at a newspaper? She can't read. In those slums nobody can read. Did you see any newsboys at the docks?" He was right, of course, but rather than admit it, I devoted my attention to the text of the article. A most surprising turn of events took place at this morning with the arrival of an unsigned ransom demand at Basilweather Hall, Belvedere, seen at the recent disappearance of Viscount Tewkesbury, Marquess of Basilweather. Despite Chief Inspector Lestrade's most astute discovery of the Lord's cache of nautical paraphernalia in a treetop hideaway— "Oh no," Tukey whispered, anguished anew. Wincing, I read on without comment. And his subsequent energetic inquiries at the London docks, where he located several eyewitnesses who claimed to have seen the missing youngster upon the very day of his disappearance, which was, I realized, just one day after that of my own disappearance. So much had happened since it was hard to believe that only 3 days ago I left Ferndale Hall. It would now appear that the Viscount, heir to the Basilweather title and fortune, has indeed been kidnapped. Delivered in the Morning Post, a brief missive pasted together out of letters cut from periodicals demanded a large sum, the amount of which family desires to remain undisclosed. Lacking any proof that Lord Tewkesbury has indeed fallen into the hands of this unknown individual or individuals, the authorities advise against paying the ransom. Famed medium and astral purgatorian Madame Layla Sybil de Papaver, however called in by the Basilweather family at the onset of the crisis, advises most strongly that the ransom, which is to be gathered in the form of gold sovereigns and guineas, pending instructions for delivery, should be paid, as her communications with spiritual manifestations advise her that Viscount Tewkesbury is indeed held captive and in danger of his very life, unless the kidnappers receive the full cooperation of his family. Madame Layla... There was more, but at this point I ceased reading. Instead I sat staring at the cab stand. At the cab stand, really. That was what stood before Tukey and me. Sporty, handsome cabs and clumsy, but more roomy four-wheelers, glossy horses and scrawny horses, swishing their tails while munching on nose bags of oats, portly cab drivers and shabby cab drivers loitering, waiting for fares. But I was not in fact seeing any of this. I was trying to remember what Madame Layla had looked like, but so much had happened in the past 3 days that I retained only an impression of red hair, large face, large body, large hand, and yellow kid gloves. A small voice said, "I have to go back." It took me a moment to turn and focus on Tukey, pale and handsome and very young, returning my gaze. I have to go home, he said. I can't let those bloody villains steal from my family. I nodded. You have an idea who sent the ransom note, then? Yes. And you imagine as I do that they are still upon the hunt for you. For both of us, yes indeed. We'd better go to the police. I suppose so, but his glance slid away. He studied the tips of his new shoes, new only in a sense as they had all too clearly been cobbled together from pieces of leather scavenged from old boots. I waited. Finally he said, It wasn't what I expected anyway. The shipyards, I mean. The water is filthy, so are the people. They don't like one if one tries to stay clean. They think one is being a snob. Even the beggars spit on one. Somebody stole my money, my boots, even my stockings. Some people are so mean they would even steal from the crawlers. The crawlers? Dosses, they call them, because they're always dozing. I've never seen any person so wretched. His voice lowered. Old women with nothing left, not even strength to stand on their feet. They sit on the workhouse steps, half asleep but with nowhere to lay their heads, too nearly dead to even beg, and if someone gives them a penny to buy tea, they crawl away to get it. With a shock to my heart, I remembered the hairless old woman I had seen crawling on the pavement, her head all sores. And then they crawl back again, Tukey said, his voice lower and more struggling by the moment. And there they sit. 3 times a month they are allowed a meal and a night's sleep in the workhouse. 3 times! If they ask for more than that, they are locked up and given 3 days at hard labor. What? But I thought the workhouse was supposed to help the unfortunate. I thought that too. I went there to ask for shoes and they laughed at me and hit me with a stick, drove me away, and then... That nasty man... His memories of Squeaky made his eyes water. He ceased speaking. I'm glad you've decided to go home, I said after a moment. Your mother will be overjoyed to see you. She's been crying, you know. He nodded, accepting without question that I would know this, as I seemed to know everything else. I'm sure you'll be able to make her understand you can't wear those Lord Fauntleroy clothes any more. He said very softly, Whatever kind of clothes, it doesn't matter. But I never knew... He didn't finish, but I believe he was still thinking about the Dosses, poor half-alive old women who crawled, or perhaps about bare sore feet in the waterfront, and Squeaky, and being kicked like a dog. 2 days in London had made me aware, too, of much that I had not known before, and now that I did know, my own ill fortune seemed small enough. I stood up and hailed a cab. An open, handsome cab. I wanted us to go in style. Tukey gave me his hand like a gentleman, and I climbed in as I directed the driver to Scotland Yard. Is Flynn writer in this book? I don't think so. I don't think Han Solo is either. Alright, last chapter. I'm gonna press on, if you guys are okay with that. Finishing up. Hydrate. Alrighty, finishing the book. Chapter the 15th. Quite aside from accompanying Tukey, I had my own errand at Scotland Yard. This is lovely, exclaimed Tewkesbury, scanning London from the hansom cab as the horse trotted along, harness jingling, directly in front of us. I paid attention only to my own thoughts. Something needed to be done about Cutter and Madame Layla Sybil de Papaver, astral purgatorian. I had no proof, but the more I turned matters over in my mind, the more I considered they might be involved in a kidnapping ring together. Inference. She had told him about me. Who else could have done so? The lodge-keeper, the Duchess, her maids? Most unlikely. Of all those whom I had encountered at Basilweather Hall, only Inspector Lestrade and Madame Layla had heard me describe the whereabouts of Lord Tewkesbury. One of those two had contacted Cutter to have him wire Squeaky to take Tukey prisoner. Surely it had not been Lestrade. Conclusion. It must have been Madame Layla. Tukey said, I never understand why they put the driver way up top and back, so far from the horse. Now I see. It is so that nothing obstructs one's view. I murmured, continuing my dark thoughts of Madame Layla. While appearing to be on the side of the angels, the woman had actually aligned herself with the devils, Cutter and Squeaky. They kidnapped a victim, I conjectured, and then Madame Layla was called in for her dubious services, so that while Cutter and Squeaky collected ransom, Madame Layla was paid handsomely for her spiritual insights into the missing person's whereabouts. They all profited, and they were all in their foul business together. In Tukey's case, although initially he had run away, Cutter and Squeaky had seized the opportunity to kidnap him afterward. While unsure of how to notify the authorities without putting myself in jeopardy, I knew I had to do something to put a stop to this villainy. Tukey said, How pleasant it is to feel the wind in one's face on a hot day. Annoying boy, must he chatter like a magpie? Without replying, lips pressed together, I reached into a skirt pocket and pulled out a pencil and a folded piece of paper. Hastily and rather angrily laying the paper in my lap, I sketched an an exaggerated portrait of a man. When Tukey saw what I was doing, he ceased his chit-chat to stare. "That's Cutter," he said. Without comment, I finished the likeness. "That is Cutter, right down to the hair in his ears. You astonish me. How do you draw like that?" Without answering, I turned over the folded paper, and on the fresh surface I sketched another person. Because I found myself in the proper frame of mind, wrought and energetic, I was able to do so without hesitation, without conscious memory, without thought, the pencil strokes coming swiftly to hand from some source deep within my mind. "Who's that?" Tukey asked. I did not answer. Finishing the portrait of a large, imposing woman, I unfolded the paper and looked at both sketches at once. The caricature man and the caricature woman stood side by side. At that moment I knew. Of course. To be a woman, all that was necessary was to put on false hair, various patent amplifiers, enhancers, improvers, and regulators, and the necessary concealments, dress, hat, gloves. I of all people should know. Tukey saw it too. He whispered, "It's the same person." The bright red wig I thought to hide the hairy ears and distract attention from the face, and some enhancement of the lips, eyelashes, and eyes, easy enough, face paint. No respectable lady would ever admit to the use of such artifice, but I had heard it was done. Not that this person was either respectable or a lady. Tukey demanded, pointing from one drawing to the other, "If that's Cutter, then who is that?" I told him, though the name meant nothing to him. Madame Layla Sybil de Papiver. "I don't care if you're the Prince of Wales," said the sergeant at the desk without so much as lifting his eyes to take a look at us. "You'll wait your turn, like everybody else. Have a seat." His gaze still on his papers and blotter, he flapped a meaty hand towards the hallway behind him. I smiled at Tukey, who, having just introduced himself as Viscount Tewkesbury Basilweather, seemed inclined to either laugh or cry. "I'll wait with you," I whispered, and somehow in the course of our visit to Scotland Yard I would accomplish my own business there. As when I had ridden my bicycle away from Kindford, my best place now seemed not to plan. Tukey and I sat at one of the many benches ranged along the dark wood-paneled passageway, benches of a singularly adamant uprightness and rigidity, worse than any church pews I had ever experienced. Perched beside me, Tukey muttered, "You're lucky with all that padding." What a shocking thing to say! "Hush! Don't tell me to hush! Tell me who you are!" "No!" I kept my voice down, for along the passageway on other benches sat people waiting to speak with the police. Intent on their own conversations and problems, however, none of them had given us a second glance. Tukey had the sense to lower his voice. "But you've saved my life, maybe, or at least my honor, and you've done so much for me. I want to thank you. Who are you?" I shook my head. "Why do you want to look like an old maid?" "Shocking boy, do mind your tongue. Shocking girl, am I never to learn your name? Shh!" No, I hoped not, but I did not say so. Instead I said, "Hush!" again, gripping his arm, for just down the passageway from the door was an opening, and I saw two familiar men stepping out. Two familiar men. For a moment I truly felt I might faint, and not due to any corseting either. Heaven help me. One of the men was Inspector Lestrade, but I had realized, deciding to accompany Tukey into Scotland Yard, that I might encounter Lestrade, and I felt sure he would not recognize me as the black-veiled widow he had met briefly at Basilweather Hall. No, what made me weak with alarm was the sight of the other man, Sherlock Holmes. Mentally I willed myself to keep breathing, to sit naturally, to blend in with the dark woodwork and the hard bench and the framed etchings on the walls, the way a hen partridge blends in with a brush. Please, they must not notice me. If either of them recognized me, my few days of freedom were over. Slowly they paced towards us, deep in conversation, even though my brother stood so much taller than the ferret-like Lestrade, he had to stoop to put his head close to the lesser man's. After my first startled look at them, I turned my eyes to my lap, let go of Tukey, and hid my clenched, quivering hands in the folds of my skirt. "Can't make head nor tail of this Basilweather case," came Lestrade's strident voice. "I do wish you'd have a look at it, Holmes." "Holmes?" gasped Tukey, sitting bolt upright at my side. "Is that him? The famous detective?" I whispered. "Do please hush." For I am sure he heard strong emotion in my voice, for he actually obeyed. Sherlock was saying to Lestrade, not nearly as fervidly as I wish he would assign more officers to find my sister. My brother's voice, while well in tune, sounded as taut as a violin string. Something in his voice, something unspoken, made a butterfly of emotion flutter painfully in my heart. "I would like to, my dear fellow." Sympathy in Lestrade's voice, but also a note, I thought, of gloating. "However, if you cannot give me more to work with—" The butler confirms that Mother had no portraits taken of herself or Enola for 10 years or more, confound the woman. "Well, we have that sketch her sister drew of her." Unmistakably I heard a glint of glee in the Scotland Yard inspector's voice. My brother's hand shot out and caught him by the arm, halting him. The two of them stood directly in front of Tukey and me. Thanks perhaps to Providence, perhaps to blind luck, Sherlock stood with his back to me. "Look here, Lestrade." My brother did not sound angry, not exactly, but his tone, nearly hypnotic in its intensity, made my heart swell in admiration for him and command the other man's fullest attention. Sherlock told him, I know you think it's a great blow to my pride that both my mother and my sister have gone missing. I cannot find a trace of the former, but I have you to thank for information of the latter, but I assure you, Lestrade interrupted, blinking, his gaze sliding to one side. I have thought nothing of the sort. Bosh, I am not blaming you for being no worse than your betters. Brushing aside that perplexing statement with one black-gloved hand, Sherlock riveted the respecter anew with his gaze. But Lestrade, I want you to understand. You may cross Lady Eudora Vernet Holmes off your list. She knew what she was doing, and if she has come in harm's way, she has only herself to blame. Pain roused in my heart again, not a butterfly ache, but a pain of a different sort. At the time I did not know of my brilliant brother's one crippling weakness. I did not understand how melancholy might make him utter such harsh words. However, Enola Holmes is a different matter entirely, Sherlock was saying. My sister is an innocent, neglected, uneducated, unsophisticated, a dreamer. I feel much at fault for not staying on with her, instead of leaving her to the care of my brother Mycroft. Despite his fine mind, he has no patience. He never could understand that it takes time, not just hardness, to train a colt. Of course the girl bolted, having more spirit than intelligence. Underneath my false fangs and pince-nez I scowled. She seemed intelligent enough when I spoke with her, said Lestrade. She certainly deceived me. I would have sworn she was 25 at least. Poised, well-spoken, thoughtful. My scowl smoothed away. I quite approved of Lestrade. My brother stated, thoughtfulness and imaginative perhaps, but certainly no stranger to the weakness, the irrationality of her sex. Why, for instance, did she tell the lodge-keeper her name? Perhaps out of sheer daring to get in. She was sensible enough afterward to take herself straight away to London, where it would be very difficult to find her, where anything could be happening to her, even if she were 25, and she is only 14. Whereas I was saying earlier, anything could be happening to a young person of yet more tender years, the Duke of Basilweather's son. At which moment Tukey cleared his throat, said, ahem, and stood up. So you see I had no chance to think, and it seemed to me that at the time no choice. I fled. As the inspector and the great detective turned to gawk at the commonly clad boy, as they blinked and stared, as recognition dawned, I stood up and walked quietly away. I caught only a glimpse of my brother's face, and had I known how rare a treat it was to see Sherlock Holmes so astonished, I would have enjoyed the moment more. But I did not linger. Just took a few steps down the hallway, opening the first door that presented itself, and went in, closing the door softly behind me. I found myself in an office with several desks, all of them empty but one. Excuse me, I said to the young constable who raised his head from his paperwork. The sergeant wants you at the front desk. In all likelihood, assuming I was recently employed at the yard as a shorthand transcriber or something of the sort, he nodded, got up, and went out. I went out also, by the window. Lifting the sash, hopping over the sill as if mounting a bicycle, alighting on the pavement as if getting off the other side. There were people passing, of course, but without a glance at any of them, as if it were perfectly normal to exit a public building in this manner. I removed my pince-nez and tossed it onto the street, where a large horse promptly trod upon it. Standing straight, I walked away briskly, as befit a young professional woman. At the corner, an omnibus was just stopping. I got on, paid my fare, took a seat among many other Londoners upon the roof, and did not look back. Likely my brother and Lestrade were still questioning Tukey as the big bus trundled me away. However, I knew it would not take them long to pick up my scent. Tukey would tell them how he and a girl dressed like a widow had escaped Cutter's boat together, a girl named Holmes. Probably by now Tukey had turned to me, wanting to introduce me, but finding nothing except 2 sketches, he hoped Lestrade, after talking with Tukey, might realize the significance of the sketches, 2 caricatures lying on the bench, along with the hideous green parasol. Sorry, my thing popped up. I hope I'm still live. I rather regretted having to leave Tukey so abruptly without a farewell. But it could not be helpful. I had to find Mum. I also very much regretted not having been able to spend more time with my brother Sherlock, even if only in disguise, to look at him, listen to him, admire him. I actually missed him, with the yearning in my heart as if I were a ladybird, and I wanted to fly away home. But my famous detective brother did not care to find Mum, confound him. All my fluttering feelings about him folded their wings and settled into heartache. Although perhaps it was just as well. Sherlock and Mycroft would have wanted Mum back in Ferndale Hall, but obviously she did not wish to be there. When, not if, but when I found her, I would ask her nothing that might make her unhappy. I was not seeking her in order to take away her freedom. I just wanted to have a Mum. That was all. To be in communication with her, maybe meet now and then to chat over a cup of tea, to know where she was. Although one could not help fearing at the back of one's mind that she had come to harm. Still, I imagined it more likely that Mum had taken herself someplace where there were no corsets, no bustles, and perhaps no hats or boots. Someplace amid flowers and greenery. Ironic, and I thought, Ironic, I thought, that I, following her example and making my escape, had gone instead to the cesspool of a city where I had not yet seen a palace, a golden carriage, or a lady in ermine and diamonds, where I had seen instead an old woman crawling on the pavement, her head infested with ringworm. Certainly Mum could never fall to such depths. Could she? I must be sure not, and I had only a few hours in which to act before the entire London constabulary would be alerted to look for me. Alighting from the omnibus at the next stop, I walked a block, then hailed a cab, a four-wheeler this time, for the sake of being closed in, my face unseen. Fleet Street, I told the driver. As he maneuvered through the heavy traffic of the city, I once more took a paper and pencil in my hand, composing a message. Thank you, my chrysanthemum. Are you blooming? Send Iris, please. I distinctly remembered the meanings of flowers that the iris indicated a message. Irises in a bouquet alerted the receiver to pay attention to the meaning of other flowers. The Greek goddess Iris had carried messages between Mount Olympus and Earth via the bridge of the rainbow. Many of the other entries in the meaning of flowers, however, I could not recall so clearly. As soon as I had found lodgings, I must be sure to obtain a copy of the book for reference. Bitterly I regretted the loss that other irreplaceable book my mother had given me, my most precious memento of her, my book of ciphers. What Cutter had done with it I would never know, or so I thought at the time. But I assured myself I did not need it for any practical purpose. Again, so I thought. Taking the message I had composed, I reversed it. I'll show you how she reversed it. Woo! Then I zigzagged it up and down into the two lines, thus. Woo. Then, swaying on my seat in my cab, rumbled along, I reversed the order of the lines to compose my message. This I would place in the personal advertisements column of the Pall Mall Gazette, which my mother seldom missed, plus the magazine of modern womanhood, the journal of dress reform, and other publications she favored. My cipher ran as follows. Tails Ivy. Whoops. I'll get this right eventually, I promise. Tails Ivy, and a bunch of jumble. Tips Ivy, more jumble. Your Ivy. I knew that my mother, who could not resist a cipher, would give this one her fullest attention if and when she saw it. I also knew that, unfortunately, my brother Sherlock, who habitually read what he called the agony columns of the daily newspapers, would also notice it. But as he knew nothing of the way ivy runs backwards on a picket fence, perhaps he would not decipher it. And even if he did not solve it, I doubted he would understand it or connect it to me. Once upon a time, it seemed so long ago, in another world, but it was really only 6 weeks ago. Once, pedaling along a country road and thinking of my brother, I had made a mental list of my talents, comparing them unfavorably with his. Now, riding in a London cab instead of on a bicycle, I found myself compiling in my mind a different list of my talents and abilities. I knew things Sherlock Holmes failed even to imagine. Whereas he had overlooked the significance of my mother's bustle, baggage, and her tall hat, in which I suspected she had carried a quite stout roll of banknotes, I, on the other hand, understood the structure and uses of ladies' underpinnings and adornments. I had shown myself adept at disguise. I knew the encoded meanings of flowers. In fact, while Sherlock Holmes dismissed the fair sex as irrational and insignificant, I knew matters his logical mind could never grasp. I knew an entire world of communications belonging to a woman, secret codes of hat brims and rebellion, handkerchiefs and subterfuge, feather fans and covert defiance, sealing wax and messages in the positioning of a postage stamp, calling cards and a cloak of ladylike conspiracy in which I could wrap myself. I expected that without much difficulty I could incorporate weaponry as well as defense and supplies into a corset. I could go places and accomplish things Sherlock Holmes could never understand or imagine, and much less do. And I planned to. Here's the epilogue. London, November, 1888. All dressed in black, the nameless stranger emerges from her lodgings late at night to prowl the streets of the East End. From her unfashionably straight waist swings a rosary, its ebony beads clicking as she walks. The veiled habit of a nun covers her tall, thin body from head to toe. In her arms she carries foods, blankets, and clothing for the poor old women who huddle on the steps of the workhouse, the crawling woman called Dosses, and any others whom she may find in need. The street folk accept her kindness and call her sister. No one knows her by any other name, for she never speaks. Seemingly she has taken a vow of silence and solitude, or perhaps she wishes not to flaunt cultivated speech, not to be betrayed by an upper-class accent. Silent, she comes, she goes, an object of curiosity at first, but after a few days scarcely noticed. In a much wealthier and somewhat bohemian section of the city, someone is opening an office in the same Gothic residence where Madame Layla Sybil de Papiver, astral praetorian, held seances before her, or rather, his, shocking arrest. The scandal of the season, with the previous occupant gone to prison, in the house's bay widow, window, a placard has appeared, soon to be available for consultation. Dr. Leslie T. Ragaston, Scientific Praetorian. A scientist must of course be a man, and an important one, quite busy at the university or the British Museum. Undoubtedly this is why no one in the great well-to-do neighborhood has yet to see the great Dr. Leslie T. Ragaston. But every day his secretary comes and goes, putting things to rights in his new office, tending to his affairs. She is a plain young woman, unremarkable except for her efficiency, very much like thousands of other young women, typists and bookkeepers, surviving in London so as to send little money home to their families. Her name is Ivy Michelle. Daily, as it benefits a virtuous and modest young woman to be alone in the city, Ivy Michelle lunches at the professional women's tea room nearest to her place of employment. There, protected from any contact with the predatory male of the species, she sits alone reading the Pall Mall Gazette and various other periodicals. Already she has found in one of these publications a personal advertisement that interests her exceedingly. So much so that she has clipped it out and carries it on her person. It says, "Iris Tiptails to Ivy." Sometimes, alone in her cheap lodgings, Miss Michelle, or perhaps the mute, nameless sister, draws this slip of paper from a pocket and sits down to look at it, even though she has long deciphered it. Am blooming in the sun, not only chrysanthemum, also rambling rose. This message was sent, she believes, by a contented woman who is wandering free in a place where there are no hairpins, no corsets, no dress improvers, with the gypsies on the moors. If she had any distance to travel, why did she not use the bicycle? Why did she not leave by the gate? If she struck out across the country on foot, where was she going? One hypothesis answers all three questions. The runaway woman had no great distance to travel, needing only to walk out on the countryside until she met, very likely by prearrangement, with a caravan of England's nomads. In the meaning of flowers, the rambling rose refer to a free, wandering, gypsy type of life. And if there is touch of larceny in the nature of gypsies, well, so there appeared to be also in Eudora Vernet Holmes. As was demonstrated by her dealings with Mycroft Holmes, very likely she is quite enjoying herself. One question remains unanswered. Why did Mum not take me with her? Not as troublesome a thought as it used to be. That freedom-loving lady, growing old, having probably only a brief time to fulfill a dream before she dies, has done the best she can for her late-in-life daughter. Sometime, plans the girl who walks alone, perhaps in the spring when the weather has warmed enough to permit travel, she was set out to seek for her mother among the gypsies. But meanwhile, as she looks at the newspaper clipping, her rather long and angular face softens, rendered almost beautiful by a smile, for she knows that in the secret coat of flowers, a rose of any sort signifies love. End. There you have it! It's the end of the first book. And for those of you interested persons, if you ever want to borrow this book from the library or read it, it tells you in the back the cipher solutions. So tips, tails indicates how the cipher's set up, to solve it, etc., etc. It tells you how to solve it. Well, it's technically not the end because there's 5 more books. So, thank you for the standing ovation. Appreciate it, guys. Yep. Thank you guys for listening. I am probably going to, I'm going to save this stream for sure. And then probably sometime this week, I'm going to reread the first 5 chapters, and then I'll post them all onto YouTube. So that people, if they miss the beginning or they want to catch up, you can. Yes, I see that, Tori. I will definitely download these to my computer. So thank you guys for watching. I appreciated it. That was a 2-hour stream, so I'm sorry it took so long. I'm going to go see what's going on with the fam. Maybe eat some dinner. But I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for your support. I appreciate any time you guys can spend watching. Whether you watch or just listen, I appreciate any of it. So thank you so much. I love you guys. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Keep in touch, and I'll see you soon. Bye.